Today is a cloudy June 23rd, 2022. I'm in Scranton, Pennsylvania at Steamtown, hoping to get some Delaware Lackawanna operations maybe today. Tomorrow I'm going to have a much more earnest effort at trying to do it, but we'll admire some of the engines at Steamtown. Here's Reading T1 2124. I've heard this engine on record albums. Great engine. I hope to see a sister engine next weekend, 2102, chasing that trip from Reading to Jim Thorpe. And here a pair of Reading FP7s, which used to haul commuter rail trains between Reading Terminal, Philadelphia and Reading, Pennsylvania. These engines were later painted in a SEPTA paint scheme and operated on those trains. Prior to that, they handled all sorts of conventional passenger trains throughout the Reading Company system. Here's number 15, a 280 built by Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1916. Originally served on the Oneida and Western in Tennessee, and later purchased by the Rahway Valley Railroad in New Jersey. This engine was located at Steamtown when it was in Bellows Falls, Vermont, and often hauled excursion trains there. And here it sits now at Steamtown in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Not sure who this caboose once belonged to, but it sort of looks like a Lehigh Valley caboose. Here's one of the Delaware Lackawanna's Alco fleet, C420. This is an ex-Delaware and Hudson, original Lehigh Valley. And the 2423 is a Century 425. Original Conrail, original Penn Central, original Pennsylvania Railroad. And this is Bridge 60 here in Scranton. On weekdays, 2 crews report here. I'm told to be here like 7:30 to 8 o'clock when they go to work on whatever jobs they have. I know a PO74 went east this morning. I tried to get him at Toby Hanna, but I think I was too late. How could a big Union Pacific fan like me overlook this thing? Big Boy 4012 static display built by Alco in 1941. What's great about this locomotive is one just like it is running in revenue service, excursions, the 4014. No matter how you look at them, whatever angle you stand at, they are awesome, gigantic monsters. Oh, he winked at me. How about that? These engines, like the Challengers and the 800 Northerns, they all had those steamboat type whistles, which made them sound like they were machines to be reckoned with, and they were. Union Pacific had probably, arguably, the best steam locomotives in the world. 4884s. Believe it or not, they weren't the most powerful steam locomotives in the world. I think that honor went to some steam engine in South Africa. This is number 7, a 242, which once worked on the Berlin Mills Railway. I'm assuming that's a paper mill in Berlin, New Hampshire. This is number 43, an 040 saddle tanker, built in 1919 for New Haven Trap Rock Company. Kind of the opposite of the locomotive we just saw, the Big Boy. Oh, this is Canadian Pacific 462-2317, built in 1923 by the Montreal Locomotive Works. This is operated on excursions around Steamtown in years past. The famous Canadian Pacific Beaver symbol. As Union Pacific helped build America, Canadian Pacific helped build Canada. The golden spike on the Trans-Canada Railroad of the CP was driven in Craigellachie, British Columbia, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in 1885. This is a Lackawanna SC switcher built by EMD in 1935, number 426. It's a prototype for future EMD switchers to come. EMD, the best locomotive builder in the world. This 060 tanker was built by the American Locomotive Company, otherwise known as Alco, 1927. Served under E.J. Lovino and Company It's an industry around Sheridan, Pennsylvania. This 280 was built by the American Locomotive Company in 1903 and served the Illinois Central Railroad proudly. Well, I'm inside the Illinois Central engine, and if I can't blow a horn on a K5LLA Long Island Railroad engine, at least let me ring this bell. Man, oh man, this is hard to pull. If I tried doing this a month ago, I would have ripped my stomach open after my gallbladder surgery. It's like lifting a heavy weight. Oh boy, but listen to that bell. If I didn't know better, I'd say Miss Crabtree is being summoned to report to the schoolhouse. If you remember her from the Little Rascals. Well, here's the pedal you step to open up the firebox. See, the firebox doors are open, but there's no fire. There better not be, or I'm going to get scolded to death. Here are the valves that the fireman operates on the left-hand side. And right here is the engineer controls. Let's see. Here's the throttle right here that he grabs. Right there, that's the Johnson bar. You move that back, you reverse the locomotive, where you can move it back a little bit while you're running and sort of set the tempo. What do they call that? Pumping? I don't know. It's a term where the engine has sort of a rhythm when it's going down the track. But this is it. Not exactly an 844 or a 611, but impressive nevertheless. Now here's an engine I have personal experience with. Nickel plate 759, one of those Lima-built Berkshires for the Great Nickel Plate Road, hauling fast freights. But what I remember about this engine is I rode on this a couple of times on some excursions. Back in the summer of '71, I rode on a trip from Hoboken to Binghamton via the old Erie route and back the next day on the old Lackawanna route. Extremely popular. People were ganging up all over the place. And then I rode this engine again, behind this engine, in July of '73 on a Hoboken to Scranton round trip right here. And it was kind of an infamous trip, climbing Pocono grade, going to Scranton. It conked out, couldn't make it. They had to get a couple of Erie Lackawanna GP7s to rescue the locomotive and bring it into town. But I don't recall we had any problems leaving to go back to Hoboken. I remember he pulled a long brace of Stillwell coaches. This engine had an awesome whistle. Meant business. This was Ross Rowland's baby, who ran High Iron Enterprises in New Jersey. Here's a Lackawanna hopper car loaded with anthracite coal. DL&W, Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western. They once had their headquarters right here in Scranton. Sometimes the railroad was jokingly referred to as DL&W, delay, linger, and wait. But I happen to know that the Erie Lackawanna was known for running punctual passenger trains, so I assume the Lackawanna did too. I'm glad I had the pleasure of standing next to this engine when it was hot and running down the main line. Now here's an engine I would love to see restored and running on the main line. Grand Trunk Western 482-6039, built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1925. These engines were fast and they could pull passenger trains at speed. They weren't too bad on freight trains either. And the Grand Trunk had a magnificent fleet of steam engines. 482s, 484s, 282s, 462s. Grand Trunk Western was probably one of my favorite steam railroads. The whistles on these big Grand Trunk engines were deep-throated. They meant business. They sounded like they could haul a passenger train 100 miles an hour. Some of them did, especially the Streamline 484s. There's the cab, the engine number, and the proud owner of this locomotive. Grand Trunk Western was under the Canadian National Railways umbrella, a great little railroad that ran from Chicago into Michigan. I have a record where there's a couple of recordings of these type of engines in Detroit commuter service, and they sounded awesome. They were flying and they had magnificent whistles on them. Here's a caboose from a great fallen flag. Love the Erie Lackawanna Railroad. It was well run, rail fan friendly, customer service friendly. In fact, their slogan was the friendly service route. They ran passenger trains on time, and they were a pioneer of UPS trains that began and spread throughout other railroads in later years. They ran the hot train westbound, the advanced CX99, the CX99, and the eastbound was the NY100 and the second NY100. And this 1917 built Canadian National 462, actually it's a 282, pardon me, was built by the Canadian Locomotive Company in Kingston, Ontario. This was also a locomotive that pulled Steamtown excursions. This car here, painted in Lackawanna colors, may have been one of the coaches that operated on Erie-Lackawanna's train 21 and 22. That was a Hoboken to Binghamton local via the Erie Railroad line through Port Jervis that connected with the Phoebe Snow at Binghamton. All of these covered cars are Wyatt Earp cars, old Lackawanna open vestibule coaches. Well, this is an original Reading Company RS3 467 owned by the Anthracite Historical Society. Here's a 1945 built Lackawanna F3A owned by the Tri-State Railway Historical Society, number 663, resplendent in its DL&W paint scheme. Now this baby is a Reading T1 484, number 2124. Believe it or not, it was originally built as a 280 back in the 1920s, and in 1947 the Reading Company shops in Reading rebuilt this into a 484 among with other engines. And this locomotive powered a number of iron horse rambles in the late 50s, early 60s for steam enthusiasts. In fact, next weekend I hope to see a sister locomotive, 2102, holding an excursion between Reading and Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Nice horn, sounds like a K3L. Where is he going? Went down below Steamtown to catch this mystery train, and here he comes. Might be the BR1 job that the Delaware Lackawanna runs. Now, that was a nice lucky catch. The leading engine on that was a C425. In fact, they were both C425s. Leader was an ex-British Columbia Railroad, ex-Erie Lackawanna, and the trailing unit was former Spokane, Portland, and Seattle.
There's an old abandoned coal mine we'll go by. We'll tell you a little bit about it. It was a big part of the history of this region. A beautiful 3-story waterfall called the Step Falls. Now that's in the gorge area of Scranton. The feature of the trip is a mile-long tunnel. It goes right underneath South Scranton. And then 2.5 miles of woods. The ride ends up at the baseball stadium. That's where our restoration shop is. And once we get stopped, we'll be turning around, coming back. But we do have a quick stop in there. It's a 5-minute station stop for those of you who want to come in. The whole trip's about 50-55 minutes. Now, the car you're riding on this afternoon is 96 years old this year. It was built way back in 1926. It ran in Philadelphia, western suburbs of the city. It is all electric. If you were wondering, it's 650 volts direct current right above our heads, overhead wire. It starts right behind us with the first pole, and the wire stretches the entire 5 miles all the way up to the baseball stadium. So that's what's going to power us. And then everything on this car is original to 1926 except the advertisement cards, reproductions of the originals. 1926, early 1960s would be your time frame. The seats have been recaned over the years. You can see some look a little bit older, some look newer. But other than that, you're back in 1926. The floor is unique. It's called a slotted floor. It was basically designed for the colder regions where you'd have snow and ice and slush, and you'd be standing in the middle, and it would just flow off your boots through the slots to the middle. And the middle, of course, is crowned, and will go out the center doors, just like that. So very unique. Electric baseboard heat it's equipped with, and this is where electric baseboard heat was first invented on the trolley cars before it was ever in anyone's home. So a lot of firsts for the trolleys there. That's equipped with extra seats. These seats fold down in front of the doors. They're called Admore seats. Of course, there were standing strap hangers for passengers. So the car pretty much equipped for everything except air conditioning. It did not have then, so you just open the windows. But I have 2 more people coming up. As soon as they get here, we're going to be able to go. And should be here momentarily. Okay, so we're all set to go. And we'll give our motorman 2 bells. That is the signal to take the trolley car ahead. So here we go. Hang on to your nickels. It was a famous trolley expression. That was the original fare on the trolley car, a nickel. Here we go.
Up ahead, he has to flag the crossing. This guy, this conductor's a regular. He's been conducting tours on this for years. He sort of reminds me of Bill Murray.
The building on your right was original to the Lackawanna Railroad. They built the locomotives here in Scranton up until 1950. Then it became an Army ammunition plant. It still is today, run by General Dynamics. And that's why you see all the security here, barbed wire, razor wire, armed guards, cameras.
And he's going to flag another crossing. So if a car comes down the road and they have to stop, he'll yell at them, "That's the fact, Jack. You gotta stop." Well, Bill Murray is earning his stripes flagging these crossings. I wonder if he has any groundhogs.
On the left, that's probably the most famous building in the city. That's the Radisson Hotel today. Originally, the Locomotive Railroad's passenger station. Last train left there in 1970. You could go west to Buffalo or east to Hoboken, New Jersey.
Actually went to Chicago.
New York City back in the day, Scranton to New York. Very soon Amtrak will be running that train in coming years. It'll be going Scranton to Penn Station.
I hope I see that in my lifetime.
And if you continue to look upstream, the Step Falls, a 3-story man-made waterfall built to harness Roaring Brook. Up above the waterfall's Nayog Park. The bridge in the foreground is the brand new Harrison Avenue Bridge that spanned open 3 years ago. And again, you're in the gorge area of the city. Well, we're going to head for the tunnel. It's right in front of us, a mile long, 117 years old this year, and it runs directly under Crown Avenue. It's a long avenue through the hill section of the city. So here we go, into the tunnel.
Traction motor. Reminds me of riding an R9 subway car in New York City. This car was built by the Brill Company in Philadelphia. Same company that built those big red Broad Street subway cars that retired in the early 80s. It's always cool in here, but today's not that hot.
is on the right on the hill. We'll pass directly underneath Interstate 81, the twin bridges. The next 2.5 miles, all woods. Our wildlife, nature, part of our route. Takes the covered hopper cars that we passed back in the rail yard. What he does, he goes up the low track to the switch and reverses his direction onto the top track. It's like a big zigzag. And on railroad, the switch up there is called the switchback. And the switchback means exactly what we're saying. You're switching back to another track. So it's just a clever way to climb a hill. Railroads never go straight up mountains. They layer the side of it with hills. Now you can see the low track is up the switch, reverse to the top. Again, like a big zigzag. That goes to the Manuka section of South Scranton, and we do not go up there with the trolley car, just for the freight trains.
Should hope not, there's no wire. I would love to see him try to get up there with the trolley. Get a running start. To do a head-end ride on the way back.
Our boulevard in Glenmara has gates, lights, and bells.
Comes the only high-tech grade crossing on this line. Climb up a steep grade to the ballpark and the terminal. Gotta give it all you got. This is a steep climb.
Directly in front of this PNC Field, that's the home of the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders, New York Yankees AAA affiliate. The building directly in front of us, that's our station stop. This is our restoration shop. So once we get stopped, those of you who'd like to come in for a couple minutes, you can. We have a viewing area in the hallway. If you wish to remain on the car, of course you can stay right on the car. It's not going anywhere. And again, it's about a 5-minute station stop. And here we are. If you are coming in, be very careful on the steps.
There's our motor man. So how come you have to reverse the trolley poles?
So we don't catch on the fittings.
It's better to drag it than to push it. Yeah.
Always a little chance that could.
Listen to that pump. A bygone sound from yesteryear. remember the Brill Broad Street subway cars had similar pumps. They were rather loud. The car shook when those things were going off. And the traction motors on those Broad Street cars were deafening almost, especially in a tunnel, which was the Broad Street subway was like 99% in a tunnel. Those big red cars, I'll never forget them. When they came at you in the dark, they looked like big monsters coming out of a cave. Big noisy monsters, and they had those peanut whistles. They'd always blow that whistle when they round a curve on the Broad Street. Well, they still do with the new Kawasaki's, but they're Westinghouse AA2 horns. Well, it's 7:15 in the morning, back out at Scranton by Bridge 60, west end of Steamtown Yard. This looks like the equipment and power for yesterday's train PO 75, which came in from the east. Got the C630M, number 3000 on the point. This is around the time that crews arrived to start their shifts. This is an ex-BC Rail locomotive, and back before that, Pacific Great Eastern. Same thing with this. This is ex-GECX, ex-BC Rail, ex-Pacific Great Eastern, just like the 3000. This is an ex-Canadian Pacific M636. They make nice music. At 10 a.m. a crew just boarded this locomotive. .2045 you see facing me is an M420 built by Montreal Locomotive Works. It was built for the British Columbia Railway. And he just picked up the C420 and the C425 that was sitting here since yesterday. I would be able to bet that he's making up his power for PO 74 to head east. got that much power on him, I would think he's doing something heavy later. Move those two engines and those gondola cars around. Now it looks like he's going to couple onto a cut of cars west of Bridge 60. Told by the engineer that they're not running a PO74 today. He's going to take these cut of cars over to NS's Taylor yard, and the other crew that left a little while ago in the van is going to work a job to Carbondale. They went over to Von Stewart's shop. In fact, this crew, when they're done with Taylor, they're going to bring that power back to the shop also. He goes, heading for NS Taylor Yard. the Taylor Yard crew told me that there was a Carbondale job running, but I didn't know where the crew was reporting, how long it was taking for them to work, where they were working, and I didn't want to risk standing around someplace forever waiting for something to come and nothing happens. So back at Steamtown, and the crew did say that on the Taylor job they were bringing the power back to Von Stewart's shop, so maybe I'll see them again. But for now, I'm just going to hang around Steamtown a little while, and they're running a steam engine around the property today. Well, running today on the Scranton Limited, that's Steamtown's little excursion around the grounds. It doesn't go too far. It goes a little ways east, a little ways west, mainly around the Steamtown facility. It's being powered by the Baldwin 060, number 26, built in 1929 by the American Locomotive Company. At 10:33, here comes the Brill trolley car, built in 1926, that I rode on yesterday, heading on his rounds out to the ballpark. These former Central Railroad of New Jersey cars. I've ridden in quite a few of those on trips out to Raritan. We used to run out of the Jersey City terminal before the Aldine plan. During the pandemic, Steamtown was virtually inactive. Even early last year, when things were starting to come up again, open up again, Steamtown was still pretty sterile. Not much was going on, and they were often criticized in the railfan circle for it. But this is federal land. It's a national park, so they're under a different set of regulations. But happily now, they seem to be back to normal. They're running the Scranton Limited. They're running some trips up to Tobyhanna. And they had Railfest this year in June, first time since 2019. Now he's going to make a run east up by the Radisson Hotel. I'm back down at the road crossing below Steamtown as I heard that K3L horn once again that I heard yesterday. Up above is the DL track just west of Bridge 60. Here comes that Delaware Lackawanna job. Seems to be pretty consistent. That was the power we saw on the Taylor job. He's returning now. That leader was a former British Columbia Rail Pacific Great Eastern locomotive. C630M. Very Canadian, and it sounded Canadian.